Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Pesachim. We are up to Perek Zayin Mishnah Yud Aleph. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden. Amen. Every person is required to eat a kazait of meat from the Pesach offering. We will learn B'ezrat Hashem Bli Neder in chapter 8, Mishnah 3, that when people register for a Pesach offering, they must calculate the size of the animal to ensure that there will be a kazait of meat for every person in the group. This Mishnah defines which parts of the animal are considered meat. The Mishnah begins, Kol hane'echal b'shor gadol, anything that can be eaten in a fully grown ox whose limbs have fully matured and hardened, yachel bigdi harach, is eaten in a Pesach, which is a tender lamb or kid, meaning it is considered edible meat in a Pesach, which is a tender lamb or kid. Now the Pesach can be as young as 8 days old, as the Torah says in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 22, Pasuk 27, much of the skeleton of such a young animal consists of soft cartilage, which hardens into inedible bone as the animal matures. Now, many parts of a young animal, like we said, that are soft and edible will harden and become inedible as the animal grows. Only parts that are edible in an adult ox are considered edible meat in the Pesach, even though a Pesach must be a lamb or kid. The determination of what is considered meat is based on an ox. Now, parts that are too hard to be eaten in an ox are not considered edible meat in the Pesach, even if they are in fact presently soft and edible. Therefore, one cannot fulfill the mitzvah of eating the meat of the Pesach by eating them. V'rashei chenafayim v'asechusim, and the cartilage on the ends of the shoulders and the other cartilages are considered edible meat in the Pesach, since those of an ox can be eaten if they are cooked for a long time. Now, when we say the other cartilages, for example, the Rav says the hard tissue on the ribs and the chest, as well as the middle part of the ear. Now, although the cartilage in an ox cannot be eaten easily, the Rav says it is edible if it is cooked for a long time, and this is enough to consider these parts edible meat in a Pesach, even though a Pesach may not be cooked, but must be roasted. Now the Mishnah continues, the Torah forbids a person to break a bone in the Pesach offering, as the Torah says in Sefer Shemot, chapter 12, Pasuk 46. The Mishnah states when this prohibition applies. Hashover et ha'etzem b'Pesach ha'tahor, one who breaks a bone in a Pesach that is valid, tahor, he receives 40 lashes, the standard punishment for violating a Torah prohibition, for he has transgressed the prohibition of, he shall not break a bone in the Pesach. And the Rambam in Hilchot Korban Pesach, chapter 10, Halakha 3, writes that this applies only to a bone on which there is a kazait of meat, or a bone that contains edible marrow. If a person breaks a bone without meat or marrow, he does not receive lashes. Aval hamotir batahor, however, one who leaves over meat even from a Pesach that is tahor valid, vashover batameh, or one who breaks a bone in a Pesach that is tameh, eno loket 40, he does not receive 40 lashes, meaning he does not receive lashes at all. Now, although it is forbidden to leave over meat from the Pesach, one who does so is simply required to burn the meat and does not receive lashes. Now, wherever the Torah gives a specific commandment for a person to follow when he transgresses a prohibition, he does not receive lashes for the transgression. This is known as a lav v'nitak la'aseh, prohibition that is corrected by a commandment. Therefore, in our case, where the Torah says in Sefer Shemot, chapter 12, Pasuk 10, you shall not leave any of the Pesach until morning, and it follows that by saying any of it that is left until morning you shall burn in the fire. We learn a person who transgresses this prohibition must follow the commandment of burning it, but he does not receive lashes. Now this applies whether a person leaves over meat from a Pesach that is tameh or tahor. In either case, he is required to burn the meat and does not receive lashes. Now the prohibition to break a bone in the Pesach applies only to a Pesach that is tahor valid. Therefore, a person who breaks a bone in a Pesach that is tameh does not receive lashes. And the Rav explains, the Torah states, you shall not break a bone in it. And the sages teach that the term in it implies that the prohibition applies only to the Pesach that the Pasuk is discussing, which is a valid Pesach, and not one that is tameh. Now this applies even in a case where the Pesach is permitted to be brought in a state of tumah, like we learned in Mishnah 6, when most of the community is tameh. A person who breaks a bone in such a Pesach does not receive lashes. And that is the end of Mishnah Yud Aleph. Mishnah Yud Bet continues, as we learned in Mishnah 9, if part of a Pesach is taken out of Yerushalayim on Erev Pesach after it is slaughtered, it becomes disqualified and must be burned. If only part of a limb was taken out, the part that was taken out is disqualified and must be burned, but the rest of the meat on that limb is still valid. However, the disqualified part cannot simply be chopped off and removed, because it is forbidden to break the bone of a Pesach, like we learned in the previous Mishnah. So the Mishnah describes what to do in such a case. If part of a limb from a Pesach offering was taken out of Yerushalayim, now the commentaries explain, since the Pesach may be eaten only in Yerushalayim, it may not be taken out of Yerushalayim. By the same token, since the Pesach must be eaten in a group, any part that is taken out of the area where that group is sitting during the night on which it is eaten also becomes disqualified. The Mishnah says, Chotech ad shemagia la'etzem, he should cut into the meat all around the limb at the place where the disqualified meat begins until he reaches the bone. V'kolef ad shemagia leperek v'chotech, and he should then peel the meat that is still valid off the bone until he reaches the joint where that bone connects to the next bone, and then cut through the joint to separate the bones. Now, although the bones may not be broken, the tendons that connect two bones may be cut to separate them. The meat that was not taken outside, which he has peeled off the bone, is eaten. The meat that was taken outside is burned. In addition, if the bone contains marrow, the bone must be burned as well. Now the Mishnah contrasts this with other offerings in which the meat was taken out of the area in which they may be eaten. Uba mukdashin kotzetz bikofitz. With regard to other sacred offerings, if part of a limb was taken outside the permitted area, so for example, if the meat was from a shilamim, which may be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim, it becomes disqualified when taken out of Yerushalayim. If the meat was from a chatat, a sin offering, which may be eaten only in the temple courtyard, it becomes disqualified when taken out of the temple courtyard. The Mishnah says, like we read, kotzetz bikofitz, he cuts through the bone with a cleaver to remove the disqualified part. Shen bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem, because there is no prohibition against breaking a bone in any offering besides the Pesach. The Mishnah states how the boundary of the city is defined at the city gates. Mina agaf lifnim kilifnim. Inward of the doorway of the city gates is considered inside Yerushalayim. Mina agaf lachutz kelachutz. And outward of the doorway is considered outside Yerushalayim. Now the commentaries explain the gates of Yerushalayim had thick doors that opened inward. The doors, when closed, filled only part of the gateway and rested at a doorstop. Doorway here refers to the space the door occupies when it closes, which is the space from the inner edge of the gate until the doorstop. Whoever can see the diagram in the Art School Elucidated Note 5 will visualize what we're referring to. Now, inward of the doorway is considered inside the city, and outward of the doorway is considered outside the city. As for the space of the doorway itself, in Yerushalayim, that space was considered to be outside the city. However, with regard to most of the gates of the temple court, which is relevant for other offerings, the space of the doorway itself is considered to be inside the courtyard. Again, whoever can see the diagram, it will help visualize. The Mishnah continues, "Hachalonot ve'ovi hachoma kilifnim." The windows in the walls and the thickness of the actual walls are considered inside Yerushalayim, and the Pesach may be therefore be eaten in a window or on top of the city wall. And that is, Rabotai, of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.